Homer led the league in tackles with 85. The deep ball for Darius Prince, and Philadelphia's on the board first.
On the draw, this is Grayson Allen. And Allen weaving his way all the way down to the 22.
10-yard line, 5. Mayfield, Dancy, all around. Throw it as far as he can throw it. Jump ball coming. Crazy stuff. Not this time.
And you want to be a wide receiver, you're going to have to take a little bit of a hit like that as Brown got him in that shoulder, but watch. Those are teeth.
Do we have a dentist on staff here?
All right, good morning, CFL fans, and thank you for joining us for another 2024 season preview. Today, we're going to be talking Toronto Argonauts with Mike Mitchell of SI.com. Mike, how are you doing this morning?
Doing well, Sam. Thank you very much for having me on.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure to speak with you, especially about some CFL. Every time I talk to you, we were just talking about this off camera, that I end up learning something, and I'm excited to learn some more about the Argos today. So I really appreciate you taking the time out today.
Thanks. I appreciate you having me on. I love talking ball for sure.
Absolutely, and it shows. I mean, you cover the UFL and the CFL unlike anybody else. I mean, once again, we were just talking about this off camera, how you've been kind of working like a madman to cover both of these leagues, and especially with the overlap over the past couple of weeks. So definitely crazy to see how many articles you manage to pump out every month, and their quality with, you know, interesting nuggets in there that you should always be reading to find out.
Thanks, Sam.
But I just wanted to jump into this and ask, I mean, how long have you been covering the Argonauts, and when did it originally start?
It's strange how this all worked out. You and I come from that hub tree, right? So I've been following the CFL since the 80s, right? Since I was a kid. Big Doug Flutie, Warren Moon guy. And so, but actually covering the Argos, it's not like in print or in media, didn't start until COVID, the 2021, 2022, and then, you know, and so on and so forth up until now. Following the league, I've always been a fan of it, but I never actually covered it in media. Not like the XFL with the craziness of me covering the New York, New Jersey Hitmen for XFLboard.com back in 2000 and 2001. So, avid follower, and, you know, of the CFL, and, you know, through Hub, you know, may have been a lot of these sites that cover spring pro football leagues. When the CFL talks happened, they were like, we better brush up on the Canadian game. And it just so happened that I didn't need any, you know, brushing up, because I was already a CFL fan before all of this, and it just so much worked out with Mark Perry over at Hub that, you know, he started a CFL News Hub site, you know, to supplement the XFL News Hub, and then USFL News Hub, and now UFL News Hub. So that's kind of my background on it. I've just been a huge fan of the CFL my whole life, and you know, my fascination with other pro football leagues started when I was a kid, when I was a very young age mocking the NFL draft, following college football, back when the draft was 12 rounds. And my interest in the players that did not get drafted or did not make NFL teams led to my interest into the United States Football League and the CFL in the 80s. So the Generals and the Argos were my teams of choice, my poisons, for lack of a better term, back then. And here we are, 4 decades later. And so that's kind of the story there. So it's been a pleasure. You know, the CFL, their PR department, the Toronto Argonauts PR department, they've been very appreciative of my coverage of anybody from the States that has been covering the CFL, and they've been very forthcoming. They're aware of my reputation, my writings, and all that. And during that whole pandemic craziness, everything was being done by Zoom. So to be able, I didn't have to necessarily be in Toronto, right? And so getting an opportunity to hop on with local media in Toronto and CFL media, guys from 3 Down, all that, and then asking questions, sometimes some tough questions. And it's a fun experience. I've had coaches who've reached out to me to give me answers on questions I've had. Lucas Barrett, Chris Bolanovich, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, I apologize if I haven't. Those guys are fantastic PR people. They're very helpful. CFL Stats Division, I reach out to them. Sometimes there's been some errors over the years with playoff implications and stats and all that. So I've gone to them for clarification. They've been so forthcoming. So covering the league has been a dream for me. I've been on so many shows in Canada, and people asking me, and they're kind of surprised. I've been on the Hamilton Tiger Cats radio network. I've been on with the great guys at Flight Deck with the Alouettes. I've been on TSN radio shows. I've been at so many different outlets, and it's been great. They've been kind of surprised at my knowledge level because they assume an American has like maybe a casual interest, and they don't realize that I'm an absolute nerd. So anyway, so that's kind of the background on it. So it's a few seasons now, covering it officially, on a professional level.
Absolutely. I actually thought it would be much longer. I mean, just based on your connections and how, tied in you really are with the league. But it makes sense that, you were able to kind of make those connections during the COVID break.
And when the CFL XFL talks happened, I was fascinated that so many people, people I have a high respect for, Dave Naylor, Farhan Lalji, reached out to me to learn more about the XFL and Redbird Capital and what this could mean. And we were sharing information back and forth. Whatever information they had about the CFL talks with the XFL, whatever information I had, and we went back and forth with a lot of different things there. And it was like, wow, I've been following the CFL for so long. These are reporters that are highly respected. They're reaching out to me. I'm just a regular guy, and we're going over stuff, and they're treating me like I'm a colleague. So respect to them for doing that, because who the hell is Mike Mitchell, right? But it was very cool to kind of take a peek behind the curtain, and it's crazy because I felt the same. I felt this feeling I have covering the CFL since the COVID craziness, 2021, all that, is the same feeling I had when I was a young guy, getting a press pass to go into Giant Stadium to cover the New York, New Jersey Hitmen. It's like, what am I doing here? This is so cool. And so I kind of got that sense and that feeling again covering the CFL, and these leagues giving you credentials and respect. You got to put in good work. You have to prove that you're actually knowledgeable about the league, and that respectful, and that you know what you're talking about. So a lot of great outlets out there that cover the CFL. Hussey's Huddle, and X's and Argos, Ben Grant. I can't say enough good things about him. Him and JB do such a wonderful job. It's a great podcast, even if you're not an Argonauts fan. Those guys are funny and smart, extremely knowledgeable. They have coaching backgrounds in Canada. So if you're an American who's trying to learn about the Canadian game, shout out to them. Like a show like X's and Argos will help you if you want to brush up on certain things.
Absolutely. And obviously also the Mark Cast, I mean, definitely can learn tons from there, more about the kind of the business side and the inner workings of the league, which is always kind of interesting to me, because to be honest, that is the part of the leagues that is typically just way over my head. I'm in it for the football, not necessarily the business side, but that's been very interesting to learn from all of you guys as I've kind of learned and grown, during my time with NewsHub. But obviously, there's a big elephant in the room anytime you're talking the Toronto Argonauts this offseason, and that's, of course, the situation with Chad Kelly. I mean, given that he is most likely going to miss as many as 9 games this season, and it looks like Cameron Dukes is going to take over, former Indoor Football League quarterback. Do you think if that verdict comes down a little bit sooner, they still approach the season with Cameron Dukes as the starter? And if so, I mean, how do you feel comfort level with Dukes here as the starter?
There's a lot of different layers to that. The first thing is, I didn't think the Toronto Argonauts, because I know people don't believe this publicly. A lot of them didn't know, like Michael Clemens and all that, didn't know the information, everything that actually went down between Chad Kelly and a former employee, assistant strength and conditioning coach. And so I think they would have looked into it. The telling thing, though, to me with Toronto is that they had 5 different quarterbacks on their winter negotiation list. This is before all the craziness came out about Chad Kelly and the civil lawsuit, and now what's led to his half a season banishment from the Canadian Football League. So, they just paid Chad Kelly. When they gave him a new contract, the highest paid player in the league. So they were obviously banking on him being the franchise for the next 5 to 10 years, to be on the level of someone like a Doug Flutie or Ricky Ray, guys who were like stalwarts, linchpins. They were the face of the franchise. And so it's an unfortunate situation for the Argos on the field and off, from an image and perception standpoint, anytime you lose your franchise quarterback. So the Argos were always looking to supplant Kelly. If they had thought Kelly's going to get suspended, or because I don't think they assumed that. And they, like I said, a lot of people in the organization didn't know the extent of all this. A lot of times employees like squabble with each other behind the scenes, or they have arguments, or there's some friction or heat. And a lot of the upper management people don't hear anything about it unless it's filed formally. So then, you can argue whether or not the Argonauts dropped the ball, whoever didn't file what they should have filed. I don't know. The league hasn't come down. The league hasn't come down on the Argonauts organization yet. In terms of that, they haven't fined him, or so. Anyhow, that's another story for another time. As far as the actual football, the quarterback position, Cameron Dukes is first man up. He's the best option for the Argos, what they currently have. In the CFL, it's not easy to just all of a sudden find a starting quarterback. It's like a lot of these teams that have struggled, you cover Ottawa and all that, they go through like a musical chairs with the quarterback position. Edmonton, you could tell the teams that, are not having a successful season by how many quarterbacks they've started. So like if you get to the point where you're starting 4, 5, 6 quarterbacks in an 18-game season, things haven't gone well. You either have had a lot of bad luck or you're not getting production. Sometimes they bench a guy and then go back to him 2 weeks later. Like, hey, let's try it again. So anyway, it's kind of crazy. The Taylor Cornelius guys of the world, So anyhow, so I think with Dukes, as far as my confidence level with him, it's difficult to say, because when I saw him play and I've seen him play, I think he's proven he can play in Canada. That's a tough transition to make. Finding an American quarterbacks that can actually pick up the nuances of the Canadian game, because in the 12-man game, you can't afford to be a split. You can't afford to be a split second late in the NFL, but you can't afford to be a split second late with your reads in the CFL, because of the 12th man. Obviously, the dimensions of the field, it being wider, more space. So making throws to the outside is difficult. So I think Dukes did an all right job. He had a very good supporting cast around him, and I give him a lot of credit for transitioning to the Canadian game. And he got some, the team didn't fall apart with him in the lineup last year. A lot of that has to do with the talent around him, but Dukes has a good skill set, be able to improvise, extend plays, obviously very mobile. Picking up the nuances of the game takes time. I still think he's a work in progress, but, I don't think you're going to, and the problem is, people don't realize, for everybody who doesn't like Chad Kelly, whatever personal reasons, him being a jerk, whatever, obviously his recent actions, Chad Kelly is a special talent. Like, Chad Kelly is a dynamic talent. Not only is he mobile, but he has a tremendous arm, can make all the throws. He took to the Canadian game. Now, we know things fell apart for Kelly in the East Final. That was a horrible moment for him. But and it's hard to eliminate that, but if you eliminate that, he had one of the best seasons quarterbacks ever had in Canada. That was his first full year as a starter, because the year prior he was caddied to McLeod Bethel Thompson, and the team won 16 games last year. I don't think we're going to see that in the CFL again. It took a long time for a team to match that 16 win effort that Toronto did in their year 150 of their existence, going 16-2. So that's crazy. So I think people are going to miss Chad Kelly, the player. It's not that I don't think Dukes can be functional, because like the Argos last year, they proved that they can be competitive and and win games with Cameron Dukes, right? It was, small sample size, but finding guys who are capable, who are top flight quarterbacks, the Caleros, the Fajardos, who's proven themselves, the Kellys, those guys, that's not easy. So I think Dukes is the perfect backup quarterback. He has room for growth, so I don't want to limit his ceiling, because maybe he'll show me more this year and he'll start to evolve as a passer. You see it in the preseason. He's making big plays with his arms and his legs. He does that all the time, but there are a couple mistakes he makes where he makes poor decisions in the coverage, or he's a split second late, which that takes time to master that. Even the good quarterbacks make mistakes like that. But I think he'll be fine. I don't know if they've done enough behind him. Nick Arbuckle's in that room to help those guys get a better understanding of Ryan Dinwiddie's offense. I haven't been completely impressed with Arbuckle in the preseason, but he's working with backups. He's not asked to do much. And really, a lot of damage has been done to Arbuckle the last couple of years. He just lost his confidence and just didn't play as well as he did when he was in Toronto, because he actually was a decent starting quarterback for the Argos, but McLeod Bethel-Thompson surpassed him in performance. So that's why, for salary cap reasons, Arbuckle was moved out. Ironically enough, Arbuckle was traded for the rights to Chad Kelly, and now he's back with Toronto because of Chad Kelly's away from the team.
So, yeah, anyway, backing up, let's talk about the running back position for a moment. Like I said, AJ Ouellette and Andrew Harris have both moved on with their lives. Harris decided to retire. Ouellette's going to be wearing green and white in 2024 with Saskatchewan. Kadeem Carey comes over from Calgary. You keep Daniel Adeboboye. Hopefully I heard that right.
You got it.
How do you see this transition going on at running back? And are you confident in the talent that you have at the position currently?
I know people who follow the Canadian Football League for a long time downplay the running back position. They don't think it's as important. Obviously we call it the 3-down game, but it's really the 2-down game, because it's very rare that you go for it on 3rd down unless you got a 3rd and short situation going on. You got 2 downs to get 10 yards. If you don't, you're punting the ball. So 3rd downs are not commonplace. Anything beyond 2 yards, you're kicking it back to the other team. So that's why running backs are not as valued or looked upon maybe as favorably as you would in other leagues. Although, we saw, I think, the impact that guys like Brady Oliveira, AJ Ouellette to me is a special player. So a lot of people have downplayed that. They think he was just like a kind of a cult hero, very likable guy, popular. And that's why fans are going to miss him. But I think the team's going to miss him on the field. I think AJ Ouellette is a galvanizer. He's a guy who pumps up the entire team with his play. He's a really good pass catcher. He's a really good pass blocker, and he's obviously a very good runner. He galvanizes an entire offense. Did he benefit from Toronto's offensive line? Absolutely. Toronto was far and away the best offensive line in the CFL last year. They allowed the fewest sacks. They averaged over 5 yards per carry. So any running back they put back there had success. But I think AJ is a special talent. It's kind of a Band-Aid situation right now. What they've done is obviously they brought in a proven veteran, Kadeem Carey, who hasn't been quite the same player that he was a couple of years ago, but at least you have that veteran presence, a guy who's capable of doing, catching the ball out of the backfield, running the ball. And then they really like Daniel Adeboboye, and Adeboboye went to a great school as far as like learning to be a running back in the CFL, because he was in the room with Andrew Harris and AJ Ouellette. So he had some time to like learn the nuances of the position, and Andrew Harris is coaching now. And so Adeboboye is an interesting runner. Whether or not he can take on a full workload remains to be seen, but he's low center of gravity guy, got huge legs, runs people over. So he's got some of the traits that you see from an AJ Ouellette, Andrew Harris in his heyday. I think the Argos will be okay. In that backfield, although he didn't play as much, the Argos also lost this year Javon Leake, who obviously set records and was dynamic as a returner for the team, and every once in a while would sprinkle into the offense. The team, Deontay McMahon is an interesting talent. He got some opportunity last year, some run last year, because the Argos clinched everything so early. So he's an interesting guy. I thought Kalen Laybourne was really their best runner in the preseason. Unfortunately, he got hurt and released, so we'll see what happens down the road with that. But I think they'll be fine at running back, but I really think they lost a dynamic, difference-making superstar that was one of the team's leaders. I think it's a huge loss for the team. Not having Kelly, and Willette in that backfield is going to hurt Toronto. So I think here's the thing, Sam. Like, I think throughout the team, and I wrote about this at Sports Illustrated, the Argos have taken the approach of like in-house elevation. So what they're doing is, and this shows you how confident they are in their ability to scout and develop players. We'll see if that proves out, because it kind of reminds me of the Patriots back in the day, or somewhat the Eagles, because they're so good drafting players and just letting veterans move on and then let the next guy man up, go in there and do the job. But if you look at it, they lost their defensive coordinator, Corey Mace. He's with Saskatchewan. Well-deserved elevation for him. What did the Argos decide to do? They didn't go outside the organization and maybe try to lure Jerry Glanville or some interesting defensive coordinator or something like that. They elevated Will Fields and Kevin Iben. They're going to be co-defensive coordinators. That's something I reported at SI. So that's an elevation. Quarterback, they didn't go outside and make a trade and try to go get a veteran or maybe some cachet guy, even though it was a little bit late in the stage. They're deciding to elevate from within. Dukes and Scott move up the ladder. Dukes gets the first crack there, right? And then running back, Daniel Adeboboye is supposed to step in for AJ Willette. I know that's the team's hopes and wishes. You get a national player there at the running back position that can, you know, have a long career and be their star there. And then, you know, it's all over the team. You know, they lost key players on the defensive line and pass rushers, you know, Dwayne Hendricks and all that. And they're just elevating the Deontay Knights, the guys that they drafted. They made moves, you know, sending guys, Jordan Williams, who's like since retired, and you know, obviously Enoch Mwamba retired. He didn't play at all last season anyway, so it was like a retirement 1 year late, I guess. But the Argos have a lot of, like, you know, they lost a lot of guys. They lost Jamal Peters. They lost Quantez Stiggers to the NFL. That's such an awesome story in and of itself. Another indoor football league guy. That's a testament to the Argos front office that they leave no stones unturned. You got Cameron Dukes as a starter, indoor football league guy. Quantez Stiggers, one of the greatest stories in all of pro football, how he went from not even playing college football because of the death of his father to trying out for fan control football thanks to his mom helping him try out, and then matching up against the Terrell Owens and all these guys in there, showing enough where he gets a shot in the Toronto Argonauts. And so these are special talents. The Quantez Stiggers, the AJ Willette to me, Chad Kelly, whether you like him or not, special talents. The Argos are assuming a Darius Pickett, who's with your guys over there in Ottawa. These are guys who were special talents last year, above and beyond. And the team won 16 games last year because they had so much depth. That depth is being tested. The team is not as deep as they were last year. And we're going to find out how good. It's impossible for the Toronto to match what they did last year, even if they brought back all the same players. Going 16-2 is very hard. You got to stay healthy. There's a lot of different factors. They're going to have a hard time. They're going to be a factor to make the playoffs for sure, but to expect them to be the surefire bet to compete for a Grey Cup, that's not the case this year. They, you know, maybe they'll prove me wrong, but they lost too many difference makers. Corey Mace was a difference maker. AJ Willette was a difference maker. Chad Kelly's a difference maker. Most outstanding player in the entire league, and he's a quarterback. So, and Darius Pickett. So, yeah, they brought back some key players. You know, the Sean Oakmans and, you know, and all that. Wynton McManus, special player, right? So you get some very good players there, but they lost a lot of good players along the way. And they've even lost key members in their front office. You got Russell over there with Ottawa now, Alex Russell, Vince Magri moving on to the NFL with the Buffalo Bills. So this season for Toronto is fascinating to me. I don't think I've ever seen a team that's a championship contender have this much turnover on their roster and this much change. And the crazy thing about it with the Argos is they're kind of like, this is part of their plan, not the Chad Kelly stuff. The rest of the stuff is like actual, they weren't crying when they lost the players that they lost. They were happy for Quantez Stiggers, but they strategically did not make offers to these players that jump ship in free agency. They let guys out of their contracts. They let Boris Beatty go. You know, they let a Darius Pickett go. They didn't make him an offer, which is crazy to me. But they have a budget, and they decided we already have players in-house that can live up to it. So I'm fascinated by where the Argos season turns this year.
Absolutely. It seems like a kind of a poetic justice in every league. At some point, you see a dynasty have to make these transitions And it's just hitting that point for Toronto where they had to try to make the transition over to younger, cheaper players. Ultimately, probably, I would imagine in part due to the Chad Kelly contract.
Yes, absolutely. Because it's like in the NFL, they always talk about, oh, you got to strike for the championship when you got a star quarterback on a rookie deal. And it's no coincidence that as soon as Kelly gets the big money as the highest paid player in the league, that all of a sudden they made decisions. We're not going to pay the running backs. We're not going to overpay for Darius Pickett. There's certain positions in the CFL where teams try not to. Because, look, this is what happens in free agency. We watch CFL free agency like Edmonton and such. They'll win the first day one of free agency, right? And then they'll win like 4 or 5 games during the season because they'll overpay for guys just to get guys to come in. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes you overpay positions that you really didn't need to. And so because they're so desperate. The Toronto, whether or not they're overconfident, their front office, their team, they think that their way works. And so they think that they're going to be a consistent winner and contender year in, year out. So for the last 3 years, they get to the East Final. They've been a cup contender. They won a cup. They won the Grey Cup, right? So it's just a question now of whether or not they can. I don't think I'm going to have a hard time. I have a hard time believing they're gonna. I don't see them as the favorite to represent the East and to win a championship this year.
That's fair. I would imagine it's probably Montreal at this particular point.
Yeah, absolutely. They have their quarterback too, right? Because I don't mean to be disrespectful to Cameron Dukes. Maybe Cameron Dukes sets the world on fire. And Ryan Dinwiddie's one of the best coaches in all Canada. No doubt about it. No question about it. Bo Levi's last best year in the CFL was under Dinwiddie. Nick Arbuckle's best year was under Dinwiddie. McLeod Bethel-Thompson's best year of his career was under Ryan Dinwiddie. Chad Kelly became most outstanding player in the entire league after, being saved from the scrap heap of the NFL. So Ryan Dinwiddie's great. If he gets Cameron Dukes to play at a high level, Dinwiddie deserves a serious raise. He just got one recently, an extension, but that'll show you how great of a coach he is and a play caller. So we'll see. You have to favor Montreal. Obviously, the other side of the fence, we know how great Winnipeg is. BC is going to be in contention. We'll see about how the other teams, whether or not in the West they come to the party. Maybe Saskatchewan surprises people this year. We'll see. But I'm not saying Toronto's not going to make the playoffs, but I see this every year in sports. 2 years ago, like the Eagles were the toast of the town getting to the Super Bowl. It seemed like for sure the next year they'll get back there and they'll win it. And they got to the playoffs, but things kind of fell off, right? And they lost people, right? They lost coordinators, which ended up being a factor. People said it would be no big deal. No big deal. And then they had issues on offense and defense and everything else. So they weren't just as good. So, and I think that's the Argos are banking on their way of doing things and their talent development and drafting and all that. They're banking on that winning out. But no matter how much you bank on that, sometimes it's hard to replace impact players. And like AJ Willett's an impact player, Chad Kelly's an impact player, Darius Pickett's an impact player. Those are arguably the 3 best players on the entire team last year, and now you don't have them.
It would be fun to be a fly on the wall in Toronto's war room right now, discussing how they may have approached things differently, knowing that the Chad Kelly situation was coming on early on in the offseason, because I kind of wonder how they would have approached this contract situation and other things.
Yeah, I think Toronto, what they needed to do is what I'm hoping they do still is I'm still opening up the phone lines and talking to Edmonton about Trey Ford, because I think, and this is even before Kelly's craziness, and you never know with Kelly. Here's the thing, Sam. Kelly is not somebody that seems to go with the flow, and I don't know if he'll conform and actually live up to the punishment that he has right now, where he's got to show up every week. Because there's kind of in the wording that CFL put in there, it's we'll let you come back after 9 games if you did what we told you to do. And Kelly's never been that great at doing what people tell him to do. So I'm a little bit, maybe he could end up, hopefully he's not an idiot, but he can end up breaching his contract, and which would help the Argos get out from under their deal. But even if Kelly's in-house and gets back and he conforms and he does what he's supposed to do and he comes back, he still has a lot of like damage to repair as far as personally because of the stuff that's going on. I would think, like I said, it's not easy to get a star quarterback on there to come to Canada from the United States, and it's not easy to just all of a sudden pluck one away from another CFL team. So I think Trey Ford, because he's an Ontario guy, is a dynamic talent. Edmonton hasn't figured out what to do with him. That's their fault. I think he would be great, even as to bring in and then have him under the Dinwiddie tree. That would be my move for the future. If Kelly wants to come back and be an adult and all that, then you're set with Kelly and with Ford underneath him. But I wouldn't mind them turning. We'll see what happens with Dukes, but I wouldn't mind like turning over the franchise to a national player who's from Ontario, who's a super dynamic talent. Guy with specialized talent. There are very few guys in the entire league like him at that position. There's a lot of mobile quarterbacks, but Ford's like on a different level. You don't get like 4.3 40 guys at quarterback. So anyhow, but that would be my take on it. Veteran thing is, Sam, like you can suggest anybody, but like I maybe they can reach into the spring leagues and like in the States and maybe try to convince a Jordan Tiamo or Luis Perez to come up. I have no doubt that Jordan Tiamo and Luis Perez would have success in Canada. It'd take a little while for them to transition, but those guys have got enough starts under their belt now and experience where I think they would do well. I know CFL teams have had Jordan Tiamo on their negotiation list for the longest time. If those guys wanted to come up and you wanted to throw them some extra money to come up, maybe. But what veteran are you going to steal from another CFL team? Who's going to come loose? People will talk about maybe Jeremiah Masoli somehow, rekindling his career, maybe ended up in Toronto. I don't know. But there aren't as many options as people think. There isn't like it's just all of a sudden, you just knock on a door and open it and a star quarterback comes out. It's difficult.
You can't over or undersell the fact that Cameron Dukes does have a little bit of knowledge on how to time up the routes with the pre-snap motion and stuff like that, which I think is a big reason why we're going to see him ultimately get the opportunity start here. Although Brian Scott did look pretty good in the preseason as well. Shifting over to defense a little bit, I mean, obviously you touched on it. You've lost Jamal Peters. You've lost, Ardarius Pickett. You've lost so many different players across that roster on the defensive side in particular. Talk to me about some of the players that they are looking to kind of step in that have been on the roster or kind of kicking around the roster that could be breakout players in 2024.
I'm curious about their decision-making at the moment because they have Leonard Johnson and as one of the players they're looking to be on the boundary and play cornerback. I mean, when you look at the Argos, they've lost Jamal, just a cornerback specifically, right? On the outside, on the boundary side, you've got Jamal Peters, Qantas Stiggers, Robertson, Daniel gone, and they just cut Tavares McFadden, who started 29 games for them the last 2 years, right? So that surprised me. That's one of the more surprising cuts. And now they're leaning on, they have what the Argos have is a lot of depth at safety and defensive halfback. Mason Pierce was a find for them last year. Pro Football Focus had him as one of the highest rated defensive players in the league. They really stole him. But then you got Deshaun Amos and Royce Mechie. They Tunde out of Calais. Always mispronounce his name. So you got a lot of depth there at the safety position. But at corner, they're leaning upon guys that don't have a lot of experience within the league. Benji Franklin. They have a lot of size. You got Benji Franklin, Leonard Johnson, Quincy Mauger. You have a lot of different versatile defensive backs that can move all over. And the Argos like their corners to be big and physical, like Jamal Peters and Qantas Stiggers, to have that height and length. And Will Fields is a tremendous secondary coach. We talk about Qantas Stiggers and his development, but he did such a good job with Qantas Stiggers and helping him get to the NFL. So he's co-defensive coordinator with Kevin Iben. I think the Argos are playing with fire at cornerback, to be honest. I think they're really good at safety because it's very important in the CFL. You can make up for average quarterback play if you have great defensive halfbacks, and the Argos actually have obviously have that. Amos, Mechie, etc. Pierce. But I think they're playing a little bit fire with going. They must have a lot of faith in Leonard Johnson and Benji Franklin, etc., to actually to man up and take the outside there, because I think against BC next weekend they're going to get tested. One of the better wide receiving corps in all of Canada. So there's a lot of moves that I've questioned this year, and I think we'll see if they get proven right for what they've done, Toronto. But I don't know right now. Robertson Daniel is also a very important player for this team. He can play a defensive halfback and corner. They didn't bring him back, and so yeah, they're gonna get tested early on in the season. I don't think defensively. You have Sean Oakman still there. They still have a lot of depth up front. Brinkman's of the world. McManus is great. Jonathan Jones, one of the better players in the entire league. They brought him back, so he's at linebacker. So, and the safety position is really good, but I think they're playing with fire at cornerback. They're going with younger guys. They're taking a chance on young guys they believe in. They've been right in the past with the Qantas Stiggers of the world. So a year ago at this time, a lot of people were like, "Wow, he's starting," and then look at where we are now. So. We'll see what happens there. There's a lot of question marks on defense. There's a lot of talent there. There's a lot of frontline guys, but with no Corey Mace and the losses at corner, again, just like the offense, I think they're going to be hard pressed to be as good as they were last year.
I would definitely agree. I mean, it's hard to replace those guys. They don't just grow on trees, but it's curious to me how they decided their priority list. You talked about Sean Oakman just a moment ago. It seemed like he must have been high on their list because, you bring back Sean Oakman, but you let it go Ardarius Pickett and Jamal Peters and these other players. So, I mean, talk to me about why Sean Oakman might have been so high on their priority list to bring back when you talked about the attrition in the secondary.
Yeah, and from what I heard, is speaking to a couple of different agents, Sean Oakman did not want to leave Toronto at all. So, and the market for him wasn't as great as he anticipated it being. The Argos got him a little bit at a bargain rate because they really thought he was going to break the bank on the open market, and that, for whatever reason, wasn't the case. And he wanted to come back. So when a team knows that you want to come back, that's kind of the story there. So, yeah, Dwayne Hendricks was very underrated for them. He could play defensive tackle, defensive end, stand up on the outside as a pass rusher. We know about Follerin, or how great of an edge rusher he is. Kind of limited against the run, but if you can get to the second and long situations, he's lethal. He made a difference for Toronto last season on the edge there. I think you mentioned it, they allocated their funds towards their offensive line. They made sure they kept that entire unit back intact. Offensive lineman of the year, Dejan Allen. Of course, Ryan Hunter. That was a tremendous draft pick that ended up paying huge dividends several years later after his run in the NFL. He's been a star. He's changed the game for them. They have Sirocco and Nick Castro. So it's the depth. We'll see about the depth of the line, but their starting five is as good as it gets. Isaiah Cage has to stay healthy. They put all their money into keeping their offensive line. At wide receiver, the Argos are deep with Canadian talent. Kevin Meatall is going to be very interesting, even though they traded away Curly Gittins, which, a lot of people question that move as well. Kevin Meatall looks like a keeper. And then, you got guys like Dejan Brissett and Tommy Neal, the David Ungerer, Richie Sindani, who made the practice roster. So there's a lot of national depth there. And then DeMonte Coxey was the breakout star. How he connects with Cameron Dukes is going to be important because he and Kelly had a great connection last year. He was a big-time playmaker for Toronto down the field on the outside. So I think the Argos are still very strong and deep. Very strong in the offensive line, not deep. Very strong, very deep at wide receiver. They go 8-9 deep. Janarian Grant was a very good signing. To replace Javon Leak on returns. We'll see how good Liram is as a kicker. He's been with the Argos in the past. Can do the same things that Beatty does in terms of punting and kicking if need be. So there's a lot of areas of this team where because of the money that is spent on the quarterback, You know, they've had to allocate their resources towards areas they feel need to be intact, and what they did that on the offensive line above all else.
Absolutely. And I mean, looking back at the draft, you mentioned Kevin Meatall just a moment ago. I mean, I was kind of curious to get your assessment of how the draft looks. I mean, very close in hindsight, but knowing that, you know, we've seen exactly how which players are making the roster, which players were released and having to go back to school. How do you feel about the draft class now?
I feel very good about it. I was a huge fan of Kevin Meatall's following his career in U Sports. I like his style of play. There's so many receivers out there. You watch him make big plays. You watch him catch the ball over the middle, catch the ball down the field, make nice catches on the sideline, end zone, etc. But Meatall's kind of a unique talent. Like, you know, it's like you don't see this. He's kind of built like a running back. He breaks tackles in the open field. He's kind of like a souped up Nick Dembski type. You know, it's like he can run the ball if you give him the ball out of the backfield. He can break tackles in the open field. He's strong. He's an interesting guy. You can see the whole team on Friday night was chasing after him. They were so pumped up watching that play, you know, like mossing a defender and twisting and turning and streaking down the sideline. You know, so I really loved him. I know they were really excited that they got him. So he has star potential. We'll see how he's used early on. Luckily, you have the DeVaris Daniels and obviously DeMonte Coxey and everybody else in that. Rashid Belly was a nice veteran pickup for them. So you have veterans around him, so he doesn't have to be the guy immediately. You know, even though they're no longer with the organization, Vince Magri and Alex Russell, those two guys are so great. And, you know, even though they've left, you're going to still see the fruits of their labor. You see it with the Canadian offensive lineman. Obviously, Vince Magri, former Canadian offensive lineman himself. He's got an all-star unit there, the Nicastros, Hunter, etc. And then you'll see the fruits of their labor with how well Meatall develops. And, you know, so, and then the depth, the Deontay Knights and all these guys that are going to get an opportunity to step up. The Canadians and the that were in backup roles are now going to get an opportunity to play more. So it remains to be seen what you know, how if the decisions they made pay off, the replacements. But there's our early promise from some of the younger Canadians that are now getting an opportunity to play more.
Absolutely. I mean, how could you not be intrigued by Kevin Meatall even before that preseason catch? I mean, he was one of the workout warriors at the combine, you know, very productive in university sports. So, I mean, crazy to see him there in Toronto. It seems like the rich keep getting richer. Tyson Hergo was another guy that I had kind of pegged as a hopeful pick for Ottawa, and he ends up in Toronto as well. I like what they did with their secondary in terms of the couple picks they brought in there as well. So, I mean, like I said, rich get richer once again. I think that maybe not right away, but long term, that draft class is going to pay off quite a bit, in my personal opinion. But shifting over to linebacker, you talked about it earlier. Enoch Mwamba has decided to retire. He wasn't really with the team due to injury last season, but he was a rather large part of the 2022 Grey Cup victory. How big of a loss is a guy like that, even though he wasn't there with the team in 2023?
Yeah, he was a special talent, and you couldn't have a better storybook ending than he had, because he effectively, even though he didn't retire until a year later, that was really his last moment on field. And what a way to, with your family, to win Grey Cup MVP honors and the most outstanding Canadian honors, and to do it with your hometown team. I mean, and then so he was crying, and deservedly so. It was a great moment of joy for him. He was around the team last year, but he wasn't, you know, the team won 16 games and had arguably the best overall defense in the entire league. And so he wasn't a factor. You know, Enoch was more doing media stuff last year. So if we're talking 2022, Enoch Mwamba, I would say, yeah, that's a big, but you know, he's in retirement mode, you know, and I think they have a lot of talent in linebacker. You know, obviously it's kind of a unique situation to cover linebacker there. Darius Pickett was like a defensive back extraordinaire, but Wynton McManus some people would argue is the Argos' best overall defensive player. Jonathan Jones is one of the better players in the league. They re-upped him. They made sure they kept him. He can cover a lot of space at linebacker. So they feel very confident about their position at linebacker. And Enoch was very good leader, no doubt, and he was an important figure for them winning a Grey Cup. But I don't know how much of an impact, to be honest, he had last year. But he'll be missed. He's one of the better players in the league. And like I said, that storybook finish was special. You don't get that quite often in sports.
Yeah, it's definitely few and far between at this point. I mean, it's not like it used to be, maybe a couple decades ago where players would be able to retire with the teams they were drafted with and stuff like that. But with the age of free agency and all these leagues at this point, it's crazy when players are able to even stay 5 years with a team at this point. But Mike, I wanted to thank you so much for taking the time out to do this with me. It's been a lot of pleasure to sit here and listen more to the Argos, learn more about the Argos. I'm super appreciative of your time. I know it's not easy to come by for a man like yourself. But any final thoughts on the Argos before we get out of here?
No, it's I want to thank you for your time too this morning. I kept you away from your kids who want popsicles. So and amongst other things, like most kids do. Thank you, Sam. I appreciate you having me on, and we'll see what happens with Toronto this season. Like, to equate this to the UFL, they could be like this the CFL's version of the DC Defenders, where everyone assumes they're going to be challenging for a Grey Cup and be in a championship, and then a year later they don't make the playoffs. I think everyone in the East has gotten better around Toronto, and Toronto's not as good as they were last year. So do I all of a sudden think Ottawa's going to overtake them? Probably not, but why not? Why not? Like, sooner or later, the Red Blacks are going to have a good year. And so it's coming. We'll see what happens with Hamilton, their quarterback situation. We know Montreal is going to be good. But do I think Toronto's not going to make the playoffs? No, I think they'll make the playoffs. But let me just say, it would not shock me. I know right now that sounds crazy. Before the season, I picked the Defenders to go 5-5 in the UFL. And everybody thought I was nuts. They won 10 games last year. They were 9-1 during the regular season, got to the championship. Toronto has enough talent where they're definitely going to be a contender for the postseason. I just don't think they're as good as they were last year. So hopefully this ages poorly, what I just said. But I just, if they win 9 or 10 games, wouldn't shock me. So I think people just assuming that, hey, you can't lose that many difference makers in your coaching staff, your roster. You can't lose your star quarterback for half a season if it's a half a season, and just assume, even if the next guy's okay, that you're going to have that same level of play. We'll see. It's going to get proven out. We'll find out. It's going to be a lot of fun. Season's starting soon. Thanks again, Sam, for having me on.
Absolutely. And like you said, East is wide open this season. It's going to be very, very fun to watch. Hopefully the Ottawa Red Blacks can find a way to win this year. That's why we had to steal a couple, executives from Toronto to bring over some winning ways. So hopefully that all pans out for us. But you're always working on something. I mean, you've always got articles in the works. So what can we expect coming out on SI.com here in the next few days?
Obviously the CFL cuts just took place. So I got an article about the Toronto Argonauts. This week I'll be doing the power rankings for the CFL and my predictions. I think you heard a little bit of where I'm leaning with things. And it's just be constant throughout the season. Anthony Miller's doing great work for SI2. We'll be covering the league, and it's an interesting journey. We were talking 20+ weeks, and it feels like the CFL was away for a long time, but several months of it coming up. So a lot of fun games, a lot of interesting stuff. I think it's going to be a great season.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Once again, thank you, Mike, for all of your time today. I appreciate it. You can catch all of Mike's content on SI.com. You can also follow him on by Mike Mitchell on X. And we will definitely catch Mike in the future here on Shady Sports Network. So tune in the future. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe for more CFL content. We will have a weekly show coming up called CFL Summer Showcase CFL Northern Lights. Basically, that's going to be completely focused on the CFL, and we will be working that around, a weekly schedule. We'll be breaking down games, talking about the most recent news, transactions, try and have some interview guests on there, but we'll see how things go with that. Thank you to Mike Mitchell once again for coming on tonight. We really appreciate it. And we will catch you in the next episode, which should be the Saskatchewan Roughriders with another CFL News Hub writer. Make sure you tune into that one as well.
I'm a game changer. I'm a game changer. I'm a game changer. I'm a game changer. I'm a game changer.